Before we get into today's show, just want to remind you of all the content available over at BangTheBook.com. We are your one-stop shop for sports betting news and information. Our writers are hard at work right now, helping you out this week. Lots of game previews, situational betting articles, current events articles, daily NHL picks from Parker Michaels, NFL power ratings from Danny Borgs, my college football power ratings. Tons of stuff over there at the website. Please check that out. And, of course, as you know, this and every edition of Bang the Book Radio is presented by DSI Sportsbook. If you sign up over at DSI using the promo code BTB and the number 25, you get a $25 free bet just for signing up. 100% deposit match bonus for the Sportsbook, 100% deposit match bonus for the live casino as well. At BetDSI, it's only a game until you bet it. Two guests coming your way here today on the program. The first, Mr. Bryan Leonard from WagerTalk.com. Bryan, how's it going today, man?
Everything's going great. It's a pleasure to be on the show again.
All right, well, we've got a lot of stuff to talk about here on today's show, a lot of it on the football side of things, and we've had some of these conversations here throughout the week with Sports Cheetah and then also Kyle Hunter, but I want to touch on these topics with you as well, Bryan. It's rivalry week. We saw Akron knock off Kent State 24-14. The Zips didn't cover, but they are going to the MAC championship game, so congratulations to Terry Bowden and the program down there. But in terms of rivalry week, does it change anything for you? Do you alter your power ratings? Do you take a different approach?
I don't alter my power ratings, but I do take each individual game separately. For example, we did have Kent last night, and I just wanted to point out that in those three games they played last night, I believe the opposition was down anywhere between the 6-yard line to the 1-yard line at the end of the game. I know Ball State threw a pick in the end zone, cost them the cover, and then both the favorites had a chance to put it in and decided to take a knee at the end. So anybody who says they had the right side in the MAC games last night were probably just lucky, and I was lucky because I had Kent State. They could have gone either way, and that's the way the MAC is, and that's one of the reasons why I love watching it is so many times that you think you got the game won, and all of a sudden you lose, and it's sort of like watching the Browns play.
Oh, my God. I'm so beyond tired of talking about the Browns here on this show. I don't even know what more I can add at this point. But, you know, I think it's interesting because last night you kind of had the dichotomy of all three types of rivalry games here. You had Akron playing for something, Kent playing spoiler in a down year for them. Bowling Green and Eastern Michigan, not a rivalry game. Bowling Green played theirs against Toledo last week. But you had a game there where neither team was playing for anything. Then you had this Miami of Ohio Ball State game where Ball State just ravaged by injuries. You feel like, you know, they're a team that just wants nothing to do with the rest of the season. And for a while it kind of looked that way in that game. But you also had the Red Hawks who went to a bowl game last year, not able to go to a bowl game this year. So you kind of wondered what their motivation was. So I think it's interesting that you had those three games where, you know, at least Kent State and Akron, the number came into play at the end. Same thing with Miami and Ball State. Bowling Green was the stone-cold winner in that one. But you had three games that sort of personify everything we've talked about here this week, at least, you know, outside of the games that are truly marquee with the really, really big implications.
Yeah, a lot of it is you have to take a look at what the line is. And last night in the Akron game, I had it at about 11.5, and the line was 15. I think closed a little bit lower than that. But the Akron situation was they just needed to win, and that's really all they cared about was just getting the win. Kent obviously had nothing to play for other than to knock off Akron. And as you know, when you're playing a rival, that could make their entire season is to enter the off season after keeping Akron out of the championship game. So I knew I was going to get a good effort from Kent, and I thought I'd get a conservative effort from Akron, and it worked out that way. Kent did everything they could in the first half to fall so far behind, and then when you got that offense that Kent has, it's tough to get back in the game. But Akron in the second half looked like they were just trying to grind out the clock and get the game over with, and that's the way I thought it would play out, and it worked out well for us.
And there are some games like that. I know we talked with Cheetah on Tuesday about like North Texas and Rice and Florida Atlantic and Charlotte, where, you know, we saw Akron get out to that 24-7 lead and then just kind of put it in cruise control. And like you said, run out the clock. They didn't want to get Cato Nelson hurt because Thomas Woodson's still suspended. So I think that may be a good angle to look at, not just this week, but in future rivalry weeks as well, where, you know, the team with something to play for is going to come out and try and put the game away. And if they're successful in doing that, taking the underdog in the second half may be the way to go because, as you mentioned, Akron got very, very conservative in the second half of that game. Still had a chance to cover the number, but they wouldn't have covered the second half line anyway if they had punched that one in at the end. So maybe that's a good angle to look at. And we've talked about derivative betting and live betting and that being the future of this industry and the future of this game. I think that last night's game and rivalry week in general, can give some good opportunities like that.
Yeah, definitely. And depending on what the score is, too, is how you can make some money. I like to play teams that are throwing a shutout at the half, expecting them to continue to play for the shutout, even though they got a big lead. You see Alabama do that a lot, where Alabama will take a huge lead, and then in the second half you just fade them. But you could also play the unders in those games because the other team's not trying to score. So to be totally honest with you, I've been doing a lot more work on my in-game in my second halves. And if anybody follows me on Twitter, I put out my second halves on Twitter, and you got the Bowling Green plus the 4.5 last night worked out well for us. So that's it. It's B. Leonard Sports. If you want to follow those every day, but we've been having probably about 10 of those a week and doing pretty well on them.
All right, let's go over to Friday here. We got 3 games in the MAC. We'll go ahead and hit on all 3 of them because you are an expert in that conference. All these games very early in the day, especially this one, game 117, 118. Western Michigan takes on Toledo. Toledo opened a 12-point favorite in this game, but this number has gone up into the 14 range. Some shops still holding on at 13.5. Toledo obviously with something to play for here this week. Western Michigan has something to play for as well, but this is just a team that, at this point, the Broncos are just, they're down so much. I think they'd like to get a little bit of momentum going into a bowl game, but with the quarterback situation there for the Broncos, it's just tough to trust them, especially because you've got a Toledo defense that's pretty solid.
Yeah, I'd much prefer a Western Michigan team against a team that doesn't score a lot of points, so they don't have to worry about coming back. Because this has been a team that's run the ball really well this year, but they don't get much in the passing game. Interesting to note, and you mentioned Toledo, they win this game and they go to the championship. If they lose, Northern Illinois wins, Northern Illinois will go. But Toledo the last 2 years has really struggled against Western Michigan, and obviously Western Michigan had the better teams, a 13-1 team last year, 8-5 the year before. But they lost both games to Western Michigan, and the year before that they had to go to overtime. So before you lay a lot of points with Toledo here, just keep in mind the recent history leans towards the Broncos here. But, Toledo, I thought all along, was the best team in the MAC, and we'll see what happens. They lose that game to Ohio, and they lose to Miami, Florida. But as we talked about before that Ohio game, they thought they were going to play Ohio in the MAC championship in the coming, 3 weeks. So they didn't want to show a whole lot, and I don't know if that had anything to do with how they lost, but knowing the way Toledo has played all season long, and that was nothing like what they had before, I think that had something to do with it. So they didn't want to show too much. They were very vanilla. Western Michigan's a team that actually looked pretty good early on. You go back and look, that 18-point loss to USC, how important was that at the time? USC obviously is getting hot now, but it seems like every year USC is one of these teams at the end of the year, everything comes together, but at the beginning of the year they struggle. Michigan State lost by 14. So then they ended up getting it together once they got into MACtion, and the offense has been up and down, but based on how the teams defend against the run, the defense has been pretty decent all season long. So we'll have to see how this one goes. My number is a little bit lower. My number is about 12, so slightly into Western Michigan there, but it's probably a game I'm going to be sitting on the sideline.
Let me ask you about this. I know you've talked about this in the past here, that the Glass Bowl in your mind is a pretty good home field advantage. But for Toledo here this weekend, 11:30 kickoff. It's the day after Thanksgiving, so a lot of students not on campus. They've all gone home to wherever they're from. And Toledo is, a decent chunk of it is a commuter school as well. So there probably aren't a ton of kids that hang around for the weekend necessarily. Do you downgrade home field advantage in a situation like that here where you've got a lot of kids on that holiday break?
I think you have to. Number one is the time the game is being played. I always bump up a night game for any of these teams if they're playing at home because they don't see those very often. Teams get fired up for it. And also the Thanksgiving situation is going to have an effect. You find that during the Christmas bowl season, that kind of thing. Also, you have to take into account the way people are going to plan out their day. And obviously your diehards are going to be there because this is an important game for Toledo. But you do have to take a little bit off. I would take a point off, or something like that.
So you would take about a half a point or a point. Do you feel like the odds makers do anything like that, or do they just leave that up to the bettors to decide?
I think they leave it up to the bettors in the most counts. I haven't seen much of a difference over the years in home field value on holidays. I will say Martin Luther King Day in the NBA, which is a huge day, basketball, everybody plays all along. I think the home field advantage or home court advantage is a little bit higher there, but I know for a long time you were getting a lot of high-scoring games or low-scoring games. I can't remember how it was. I think it might have been low-scoring games because teams weren't used to playing at those certain hours. So there are, around each holiday, there's certain things that you can take make some money on by going back and following trends. Obviously, it's tough to do when they're only going to play that one day all season long, so you're not going to get anything current. But that holiday deal in the NBA has worked out well with the under. I don't know how it's done lately, but we were able to get on that pretty early when they started doing that.
All right, we'll slide down to game 121, 122 on the board here. Noon kickoff in Mount Pleasant between Northern Illinois and Central Michigan. Northern Illinois, a 3-point road favorite in this one. Now, I don't know if they're going to be doing some scoreboard watching or not. I imagine that someone will be able to find out the score of that Toledo game. But that's an interesting angle here because for Northern Illinois, they don't really have anything to play for in this spot. Now, if they win this game and win a bowl game, they'll get a 10-win season, so maybe that's something for them to look forward to. But with it looking like Toledo's probably going to beat Western Michigan there, Northern Illinois won't make it into the MAC championship game. If Toledo loses and Northern Illinois wins, they would get to go to that game in Detroit. So do you just avoid this game from a full game standpoint and maybe look for live opportunities, or do you feel like you have an edge here?
Well, I'm in the line, basically what it is. So starting off, I don't see much there. Northern Illinois is actually, I didn't expect them to be this good this year. They've actually played very well. Losses coming to Boston College, San Diego State, and then Toledo. So when they played upper-class teams, they haven't been able to win. But, they've won every other game that they've played. I would consider a Central Michigan team in that range where they should be able to beat them. They have the personnel to beat them. So if you take a look at what they've done this year against that level of competition, they've done very well. Central's lost to Syracuse, Miami of Ohio, and Boston College, and Toledo. So the Syracuse and the Miami of Ohio were not the upper echelon. So when you take a look at it that way, the Northern Illinois looks like they are the team that could win this one. But, yeah, with the motivation and everything going on, who knows if they're preoccupied with the other score. I would think probably not once you get on the football field. And that's the thing is, so much of how you handicap a game is what is happening as the week goes on, how you practice. And teams just can't sit there and look up at the scoreboard and all of a sudden they haven't practiced well all week long. And they look up on the scoreboard and they see Toledo's losing and then they get all excited. And, well, if you haven't paid attention to practice all week long and you haven't done what you're supposed to done, you just can't turn that switch on and off. It's not like LeBron James in the NBA where when he's ready to fire, he's getting ready to fire and the other team's in trouble. It just doesn't work out that way when you've got a full team of players like that. So I don't know if there's anything by looking at the scoreboard, but I think that Northern deserves to be the 3-point favorite here.
Well, Central Michigan's such an interesting team because, they've had a fine season. They're 7-4, 5-2 in conference here. And, this is a team with John Bonamigo. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. When they beat Western Michigan, he was ecstatic. He slept with the rivalry trophy. Then they pick up that Michigan MAC trophy by beating Eastern Michigan. You go on the road, you think it's a little bit of a flat spot there against Kent, but they just hung 42 points in that game. Played pretty well offensively. The defense has had some issues here in the second halves of games, and Central Michigan was a top 40 defense for a while from a yards per play standpoint. So I kind of wonder about that, about their recent body of work. Blowing out Ball State is nothing. You win the 2 rivalry games against the directional Michigan schools, beat a bad Kent team on the road. I just sort of wonder, what the mindset is for Central Michigan here in this spot. It is senior day, so maybe that's something that, kind of gets them a little bit energized. But, when you've played the games that you've played here lately and beaten rivals and then gone on the road for a long trip, it just sort of makes me wonder, where the Chippewas are at right now.
Yeah, this is a team that has done much more than what I thought they were. Brad Powers and I were over at the South Point when they put out the season wins, and he had asked me, he said, what do you see that's off? And I said, Central Michigan's too high. And he says, yeah, I've already played it. So we were in agreement on that. But they've got better quarterback play this year than what we thought they were going to get. So they have played pretty well. And you take a look at, the last 2 games, you talked about the offense. In the first half against Eastern Michigan, they averaged 8.1 yards per play. Last week against Kent, 11.0. So the offense is starting to come on a little bit as the season goes on, but they've been very inconsistent because they've had games against Toledo. They only averaged 2 yards a carry in the first half, and against Western Michigan, or 2 yards per play, in the first half, and Western Michigan only 3 yards per play. So they've been very inconsistent offensively, but they're on a nice little run now. But we'll have to see how this one turns out.
All right, how about game 123, 124 on the board? Ohio makes the trip up to Western New York to take on Buffalo. This number opened 4.5. It was sitting mostly 3.5 yesterday. There's only a couple 3.5s left. Most of the market at 4, including DSI. BetOnline's got a little bit of extra juice on Ohio at minus 112. This is a fascinating handicap to me. You've got an Ohio team that hasn't won the MAC in a long time, and they won't do it again this year because they lost to Akron last week. So this game effectively means nothing to them, but they do have a good head coach in Frank Solich, a guy that's been there a long time. And again, they're one of those teams that has a shot with a win this week and a bowl game win to get to 10 victories. Buffalo, on the other hand, they need this game for that all-important 6th win to get bowl consideration. And Buffalo should make it to a bowl game. I think that they're in a position now with the number of 6-win teams where they would get one. So seems like Buffalo's the more motivated team, but Ohio's the better team. So what are you seeing from this game, Brian?
Yeah, actually, I read something this morning that there's not going to be enough 6-win teams, so they'll have to take 5-win teams to make it to a bowl. And based on the size of Buffalo and how they travel, they're going to need to win the 6th game, I believe. There's bigger schools that travel better that are only going to have 5 wins if they decide to take a bowl. A lot of times the bigger schools decide that they don't want to do it, and it's been a down season, and I could definitely see that. But you go back and look at the history here. The home team has won the last 7 meetings in straight-up fashion. You've got I made the line here 3, so I've got a slight lean here with Buffalo with the number. Buffalo, as you pointed out, I think the game means more to them. Also, it means more to the program because you've got a team here. You go back over since 2013, they were 8-5, but since then they were 5-6, 5-7, 2-10 going into this year. So this is it would be a big boost for Buffalo to get into bowl consideration here and get that 6th win. Ohio coming off of that Toledo win, they were really, really big. And, you take a look now, and this was one of the things I talked about last night in my write-up for the Kent game. They were a 15-point favorite at Akron in that game. And Akron wins that game straight up, which just goes to tell you that they're a 15-point favorite at Akron, and then Akron all of a sudden is a 15-point favorite at home against Kent. There's not a 30-point differential between Ohio and Kent. In fact, Ohio played Kent at home just a month ago, and they were only laying 17. So one of the things I do the later points of the season, and it works out great for college basketball, is start to compare when you're in conference action how many points a team is giving now as opposed to what they were giving at a certain point. And it's just amazing how much the changes are in the point spreads based on recent activity. As I pointed out, Ohio crushes Toledo, and everybody thought that this Ohio team's coming on. But as we discussed, we don't know what kind of effort Toledo gave in that game. Then all of a sudden, the next game, they're laying 15 to Akron, and not only do they not cover, they don't win the game at all. So I think Ohio's going to be a little bit down here. They did have the week off of a bye, but you've got a bye game, you've got a bye week, and then you've got this game against Buffalo, and then you're going to your bowl game. I don't know what kind of how the team stays, concerned about this game and how much they pay attention about this game, because as as I pointed out, they're waiting for the bowl announcements, and so we'll have to see. But at this point, I think Buffalo has got the motivation, the short history of the 7 straight years of the home team. Personally, for the program, I kind of like to see Buffalo make a bowl game.
I think that's a really good point you bring up about what it means to a program to win a game like this and get back to a bowl game. I mean, Lance Leipold's done a really, really phenomenal job here in Buffalo. Not a big surprise. I mean, this was a highly decorated coach of the Division III level. It was just a matter of, being out there on the recruiting trail and getting some more guys here into this program, and he's done that. I mean, Buffalo's got 2 guys at quarterback that they could absolutely use, basically interchangeable. Tyree Jackson, a little bit more of a runner. Drew Anderson, a little bit more of a passer, but both of those guys have been very, very good this year. You got a junior in Anthony Johnson who's got a 1,200-yard season. Buffalo's got building blocks for next year. And to get those extra, probably 10 or 12 practices here at this point and then get to one of those bowl games, very, very significant for a program like this. So here's my question, Brian. Why hasn't this line gone down? I mean, if Akron had lost to Kent State last night, Ohio would be in the driver's seat to win the MAC East and go to the MAC championship game. We figured Akron probably wasn't going to lose. Now that we know they haven't, I'm surprised that this number hasn't gone down closer to a field goal, maybe even 2.5. Is this a move that you think we'll see tomorrow then?
I think it'll happen before the game goes off. I think it'll go down to Buffalo. I don't know if it gets to 2.5, but I think it'll be at 3. And a lot of people remember what they've last seen, and they saw Ohio beat what is considered to be the best team in the conference in blowout fashion. So we'll have to see how that goes. But yeah, it's a game where I think all the motivation is on the Buffalo side. Ohio's obviously, Frank Solich got a terrific coach, and he's going to have them as prepared as they can be. But I just think this game means so much to Buffalo and that community. They'll get a good, even though it's the day after Thanksgiving, I think they get a good output of people at the game and see how this one goes.
We talked about a lot of rivalry games with Brad Powers. I already recorded that segment for tomorrow's show, so that's something for our listeners to look forward to there. But one rivalry game that Brad and I didn't talk about, we haven't touched on it here throughout the week, Brian, I want to throw this game to you. Game 227, 228. We're going to go all the way down the board to almost the last game on the board. Florida State takes on Florida. Florida State, a 5-point favorite in this game on the road in Gainesville. And this is such a unique spot for both of these teams because traditionally this is a game where you've got 2 really good teams. Maybe somebody's playing for a 10th win. Maybe somebody's just playing for, that rivalry pride. Here you've got a Florida State team that needs to win this game and beat Louisiana Monroe next week just to make it to a bowl game. You have a Florida team that's not going to a bowl game, didn't reschedule the game against Northern Colorado, and they also have the coaching change with Jim McElwain out. So this is not the traditional Florida State-Florida game that we're used to seeing.
No, it's definitely not. And it's the first time that I can remember that this game hasn't had any significance. Florida State last week, the Delaware State game, and they took out some frustrations on a very weak opponent. Florida actually played pretty well against UAB. It was the only game I lost in the Gold Nugget contest last week was UAB, and halfway through the first half, I knew I was on the wrong side of that as Florida, just bigger and stronger, was able to just grind it down the field against UAB. And but I was more impressed by Florida in that game is they continue to put it on. They only allowed 7 points defensively, and that's the thing of this Florida team. They've had such a good defense over the years, and going into the last few games, they give up 42 to Georgia, 45 to Missouri, and 28 to South Carolina. And you would think you would consider this a disaster year for Florida, but go back and look at the teams that they have lost to and where they're ranked at this point. You've got a Michigan team they lose to in the opener. Michigan's a top 25 ranked team. LSU, Texas A&M is probably the only game that they've lost that hasn't been against a top ranked team at this point. But you got Georgia. Missouri's playing great ball right now. They're not obviously ranked, but nobody wants to stand in front of Missouri right now. And then you got South Carolina, who's made the top 25 now. So it's not such a disaster when you're looking at in retrospect. Although this Florida team did not do what they expected, but I kind of prefer them here against this Florida State team, who one thing I take a look at and I track all the time is I do everything in the first half, and I take a look at how many drives start in opponent territory. And the last 3 games, Florida State has had 0 drives starting in opponent territory. In fact, they've only had 5 all season, which is ridiculous for a team that I had ranked basically number 2 or number 3 coming into the season. On the entire season, they've had 5 drives starting in opponent territory. That tells me the defense is not doing the job. The special teams are not doing the job. Just the last 3 weeks, Boston College, 2 drives in Florida State territory. Syracuse, 2 drives in Florida State territory. And Clemson, 2 drives in Florida State territory last week. They are just not doing the little things. They're not playing the defense. They're not jumping on loose balls. The special teams are not doing well. And you've got a conservative team in Florida who's going to play more of a grinded-out type of offense. And I'm taking a look at this. I'm going to say who's going to be making the mistakes. My numbers say Florida State's going to make the mistakes, and we're already asking them to win in a tough spot, laying that number. It wouldn't surprise me if Florida wins this one straight up. I think this might be a good money line play.
No, I think so too. I think you're really onto something there, and everyone's going to look at that, at Florida State beating Louisiana Monroe next week and saying, okay, well, this is the game they have to get through to get to a bowl game. And maybe the players care. Jimbo Fisher's saying the players care. But this is a Florida State team that expects to be in the college football playoff. At the very least, they expect to be in the ACC title game. Going to some throwaway bowl game on December 22nd, not what Florida State expects to be doing. So I do wonder how invested the players actually are, in getting that swag bag and having extra practices and all that type of thing. On the other side, you mentioned Florida and how hard they've been playing. That Missouri game, the first one without Jim McElwain, that was the first game with interim Randy Shannon, and they only gave up 450 yards in that game. Gave up 45 points, but it's not like they gave up 500-plus yards. Not that 450 yards is a good thing for Florida, but still, that was a game where they had an interim head coach making his first, start as the head coach, so it was a bad spot for them. That South Carolina game I watched, the majority of it, I am a South Carolina fan by marriage, and the Gamecocks played pretty well in that game, but Florida was just max effort, and I was very surprised to see that effort level out of them. Coming off of back-to-back blowouts with an interim head coach, they still came to play, man. They were playing like they had something to play for, and I give them a ton of credit for that. And, you mentioned you saw it in that UAB game last week. That means a lot to me. At this point in the year, when you're a Florida team that has similar expectations to Florida State and you're playing as hard as you are, that's a team that I want to trust. And I will be on Florida this week, much like it sounds like you will.
Yeah, there's talk out there that, some of these coaches that are highly in demand, they've got Florida out there, they got UCLA out there. So if you're a Florida player, and especially if you're on the offense, you're getting some of these guys that have had a lot of success offensively that are out there as coach in waiting. You got a chance to play under that guy. You're going to want to show him something. And if he's watching this game and he hasn't decided yet, and he sees that they're not giving any effort in the game, they just don't have it, then that may have something to do with the decision they make. So I would think you would want one of those highly in-demand coaches to come coach for you, and I expect a good effort out of the Gators.
All right, let's go to the professionals here. We'll go to the NFL side. We'll start with the Thanksgiving game, and then we'll talk some general thoughts about Sunday's numbers. And you and I were talking before the show about just how brutal and ugly this Sunday card is. But let's go to game 107-108. First one on the board here. We'll start things nice and early on Thanksgiving. NFC North rivalry matchup. Minnesota takes on Detroit. These two teams played on Thanksgiving last year. Detroit took down the victory. This number opened pick'em. Now it's -3 with varying juice out there in the market. DSI's -3, -05. Pinnacle's -3, +106. So we're kind of all over the map a little bit, but we're on that key number. Brian, are you surprised to see Minnesota as the preferred side here?
I kind of liked Minnesota. When I took a look at it, I couldn't believe they put it out at pick'em. And now that the line is 3, I want nothing to do with it. And that's one of the things. A lot of guys will chase numbers, and you've got to have a number in your head about what you want to play it to. And at pick'em, I thought it was a little bit low. I said Minnesota's the better team here. Detroit, I don't think they have. Their record's pretty good, but I haven't been overly impressed with them. But then when the number's gone to 3, it's going to take me off of it because you take a look at Minnesota, and obviously it's a divisional game, and both teams know each other very well. But Minnesota was coming off of that game where they go into Washington as a pick'em. They played a great second half in that game. First half, they were up by 11. They held off Washington and ended up winning that game by 8. That was coming out of the bye. And then they played the Rams last week, and I had Minnesota last week, and laying one. They win that game 27-7. It was 7-7 at the half. Played an excellent second half against the Rams. And if you've watched the Rams this year, anytime you can hold that team to 7 points is pretty amazing. In fact, on the season, only twice of the Vikings allowed more than 19 points, allowed 26 at Pittsburgh and 30 at Washington. So, and in the Washington game, they had that lead, so they were playing more of a prevent defense. So Minnesota's defense is very good. But I don't know if the spot is very good. And, in fact, I think the spot's pretty bad because you've got the short week and you got to go on the road after playing one of your best games of the season. Minnesota's actually got four of their their next 3 games are all going to be on the road, 4 of the next 5 on the road. So even though this is a divisional rival and it's a short week, Minnesota's going to want to win this game. But, after that they play Atlanta, Carolina, Cincinnati at home, and then go to Green Bay, which will not be as daunting as it was earlier in the season. Detroit, I haven't gotten a lot of Detroit. I haven't thought they were very good. The defenses look pretty good all season long, but on offense, they're a one-man team, and that's the quarterback. And congratulations to Stafford with the big contract. Problem is, when you pay a quarterback that kind of money, it's going to be tough to surround him with quality guys. And I didn't like, I thought he deserved to get paid. I didn't know he should get paid that much. And I think that's going to hurt Detroit in the future when they don't have as many good players around him on offense to complement him. But Detroit off of Cleveland, or Green Bay, Cleveland, and Chicago, pretty mediocre competition coming into this one. This is the game Detroit needs to have, obviously, because Minnesota's winning the division. At 3 or better, I'm leaning Detroit. If it gets to 3.5, I may end up playing Detroit here, all based on the number. I said, pick them. I would have played Minnesota. 3.5, I'll play Detroit.
Now, let me ask you about this here with the Thursday games, and this, of course, a 12:30 kickoff, which is something that happens once a year in the NFL on Thursdays on the Thanksgiving game. Also with the Chargers in Dallas playing at 4:30. That's a local time, 3:30 Central Time kickoff there. So, this is a unique spot for all 4 of those teams. I mean, you're used to the Thursday night game in prime time. It's still unique for the Giants in Washington to have the short week, but the early kickoff on Thursday, something a little bit different. And what's kind of interesting to me here is I don't feel like the totals market has adjusted. Do you think there's an edge to be gained there?
It possibly could, and that's a good point, because normally when we're playing these Thursday night games, it's a night game on the East Coast. So now we're getting 8 hours earlier or something in that range for this Vikings-Detroit game. Detroit's used to playing here. They play these Thanksgiving games all the time. So it may have an effect on Minnesota's offense. It's a good point. I didn't really think of that because of it's bad enough to play on a Thursday, but to play that much sooner definitely can't be helping at all for the offense.
Well, and that's something I think about and something I've been trying to process a little bit more here across all markets, but especially in the NFL, is that, a lot of times, I mean, this is just stuff going off the numbers. These spreads are largely power ratings based, and maybe there's a little bit of inflation, because of recent betting action or whatever else. But in the totals market, I mean, this is probably what the models and the things that they have, the systems they have, are spitting out for these totals. And I feel like if Minnesota and Detroit was played on Sunday as opposed to Thursday at 12:30, this total would still be 44.5. So I do kind of wonder if maybe that's an inefficiency that we can look to grab on here just for this 1 week with the Thursday games.
Well, I know that there's a lot of people that bet the Thanksgiving games that don't usually bet or don't play that many games. If you're watching these games with your family, chances are if you're any type of bettor, you're going to be playing all 3 of these games, which is not the wisest move in a lot of situations. But if you're looking to play a total, you don't want to look at an under. So maybe they're just anticipating that the line's going to be bet up and they're putting a little stop on it for the wise guys by putting it up a little bit right now. So we'll have to see how this goes, but who knows? Maybe it'll go up a little bit farther before the games kick off.
No, that's an excellent point, wanting to protect against a little bit of public action, because you don't know if the sharp guys are going to come in on the totals for these games. I mean, I would certainly think so. I would think that there are some people out there in the sharp community that are sort of thinking along the same lines that I am. But yeah, like you said, your recreational guys that want action, want something to pay attention to on the holiday, they're not playing the under, like you said. So I think that's a really good point that you brought up there. All right, Brian, this Sunday and even on into Monday card, I mean, I imagine the NFL really wishes they could have flexed out of Green Bay and Pittsburgh and Houston and Baltimore here this week, because you don't have the types of matchups that you were hoping to get in prime time. But overall this week, Philadelphia, 13.5-point favorite. New England, 16.5-point favorite. Kansas City, a 10-point favorite. We haven't seen an adjustment in this number at all with Tyrod Taylor officially named the starter for Buffalo. The Falcons are laying 10. Pittsburgh's laying 14. You've got a bad Cincinnati team laying more than a touchdown. Seattle laying almost a touchdown on the road. Man, this is not a good week for a lot of people that like to play dogs and kind of like to be contrarian, because you're getting line value, but it's tough to swallow taking these teams.
It definitely is, and we talked a little offline about the Miami New England. If you're a bookmaker, the line's too high. But if you're a bookmaker, you lose to New England all the time, you're going to make somebody pay what you think is a premium. Well, that's the same thing they've been saying for the last decade, and New England continues to be probably the most bet on and most profitable NFL team over that time, which is telling you we'll look at this 20 years from now, if any of us are still around, 30 years from now, and we'll say, how the hell did the New England Patriots have such a good spread record when they were such a good team and everybody wanted to bet them? That is just a tremendous ability out of the management for New England and Bill Belichick. And because just think about that. If you are the Golden State Warriors in the NBA and everybody thinks you're the best team, you end up at the end of the season, you're cashing 62, 63% of your wagers, even though you're betting on Golden State. That's amazing. And that's just not 1 year. That's a decade. New England's just so good against the spread. And because of that, and because Miami has looked so bad, they just have to put up as high a number as they possibly can, hoping the wise guys, because the public won't come in on Miami, but hoping the wise guys will bet them. And it's worked for the Browns the last few years. Most of the wise guys have come in on the Browns, at least up to this point. Now I think everybody's so upset with the Browns. I don't know what kind of money will come in on it, unless it's just guys that are definitely just playing numbers. But when you see these mismatches, and some of them are too high. The Kansas City Buffalo to me is too high. This is the line in the Kansas City game. You're basing it on how they played earlier in the season. Buffalo, if they go back to Tyrod Taylor, they're a better team than a double-digit underdog at Kansas City. So, but when teams have played so bad, and it's tough to get the public and tough to get the wise guys to put some money on them.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I look at another example, this Chicago-Philadelphia game, which, spoiler alert, I talked about in the Super Contest segment here for this week, which we already recorded here early on Wednesday because of the holiday. You've got this Philadelphia team that's covered 7 straight numbers. They just blew out Dallas on the road in a primetime spot. That was 2 weeks after they blew out Denver, who we all thought had a great defense, and Philadelphia scored 51 on them. Thought they were in a terrible spot against San Francisco. The Eagles are laying 13. Short week, off a division game, off a late cover against Washington. They win that game by 23. So Philadelphia has kind of become that one-year team, almost an Alabama-esque team in that they're really good. Everybody knows they're really good. We've got a premium on their numbers, and it still doesn't matter because they've covered 7 straight. And then you see that here this week with them basically being a 2-touchdown favorite. It seems like the markets are just, they're just trying to do whatever they can in a league where, this year I know there's a lot of teams hovering around 6-4, 5-5, that type of thing, but it just doesn't feel like there's any parity because the best teams are just dominating.
Yeah, I've been so impressed by Philadelphia, and that was a second-half play we had on Philadelphia the other night that I tweeted out for my Twitter followers. But, yeah, this team is probably the most complete team in the NFL. Their defense, New England is as good as they can be, but Philadelphia from offense, defense, special teams, I think probably is the most complete team. And and you got a Chicago team that you've got a rookie quarterback who's only played a half a season. What kind of success is he going to have against this Eagle defense? And you try to find your lows and your highs on each of these teams from a power rating standpoint. And when Philadelphia is a team that you've got rated pretty well anyway, if they continue to cover, which they have, as you said, 7 in a row, the problem is, have we seen the high out of Philadelphia yet? And we don't know that because they continue to cover the spreads. So there's some question marks on how good this Philadelphia team is. Are they even better than what they have looked? Can they be? Chances are no, but you don't really know at this point. So I look at the game and the line to me is too high also, but how many points are you going to get out of the Bears here? And the way the Philadelphia's offense is going, how, playing at home, they've done really well at home. How is Chicago going to slow them down a little bit defensively? It's probably not a game I'm interested in, but it's a good thought process between the game, knowing that you got the hottest team in the NFL here in Philadelphia, and you kind of still want to play them, even though the line is high, because you've seen the way they play. As they say, they passed the eye test, and they've been very impressive from the eye test.
Bryan Leonard from WagerTalk.com. What do you got going on over there right now, man?
Like I said, I've been putting all my second halves out on Twitter. I try to get them out as soon as possible. You don't get a lot of time to bet into them, so just be prepared when we get to half times on these games that you're following me on Twitter. But, on a great run right now. We've gotten off to a nice start in hockey. Football's been going really well. MAC, of course, is what we're known for. Our plays are available over at Wager Talk each and every day.
Well, Bryan, happy Thanksgiving to you and yours, man. Really hope you guys enjoy the holiday. Thank you so much for joining me. You can follow Bryan on Twitter at BLeonardSports. We'll talk to you again next week, bud.
Sounds great. Take care.